Scientists have studied the Great Earthquake of 1906. They learned about tectonic plates and faults. They know San Francisco will be struck again, but they don't know when, exactly where, or how hard.
To predict an earthquake is the holy grail of seismography. Everyone since 1906 has wanted to know whether they can predict. Well, the shorter answer is they can't. They can predict hurricanes, you can predict volcanoes, but earthquakes are still a mystery.
Striking without any warning, an earthquake is something that you have to prepare for. Not just food and water. Preparations start with the kinds of buildings built and where. In the rush to rebuild after the '06 quake, they rarely considered the demands of the future.
There are two problems with reconstruction that affects life today in San Francisco. And one is the non-permit rebuilding and the quick rebuilding put structures back into what was wiped clean space that could have been more earthquake resistant or more conducive to a safer future. The second problem with rebuilding is, since they were downplaying the earthquake damage at the time, there wasn't an accurate count of what buildings were damaged, where, how much, and why.
What we lost in the fire in San Francisco is the engineering expertise that should have come out of that earthquake, which buildings worked and which buildings didn't. And that's really a sad loss.
Seismic engineers agree that when the big one hits, survivability will be based on two factors. One, the soil under the building, and two, the type of building. This USGS map indicates by color the kind of soil on the peninsula. Buildings placed in the blue areas are anchored into bedrock, not likely to be very affected by ground shaking. The vast areas of yellow indicate compacted sand. If foundations are sunk deep enough, they will also be protected. The red areas are made land along the coastline. Any structure in these areas may be in danger and susceptible to amplified ground shaking.
Most of the ones that came through with little damage in that earthquake were the buildings that were on the better soils. And the ones in the Mission District, the ones along the waterfront, all damaged. Most of them were destroyed, actually, in the earthquake.
Construction is the other factor. Wood frame buildings with lath and plaster construction can bend with the ground motion and will survive. But older multi-storied buildings are in danger. Many of these built with weaker building codes in the 30s and 40s.
Soft-story buildings are a real problem in San Francisco. You have offices and apartments built over these soft stories, which have no diagonal bracing on the first floor. That is very vulnerable to ground movement.
Masonry buildings, basically brick walls without internal bracing, don't move as a unit when the ground moves. They split apart and crumble. They are death traps unless built on bedrock. Steel frame construction with lateral bracing will withstand the shaking, but the building contents will be in shambles. It would take 83 years for the city to be taught a lesson in the danger of construction without earthquake codes. On October 17, 1989, at 5:04 p.m., this deadly instruction came in the form of a magnitude 7.1 jolt that shook the San Francisco and Monterey Bay regions. The epicenter is located near Loma Prieta in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It erupted along the San Andreas Fault at a depth of 11 miles. On this particular afternoon, most businesses closed early. Fans gathered to watch the third game of the World Series being played in Candlestick Park. The 10-second shaker pancaked a large section of the double-stacked Cypress Viaduct, part of the Nimitz Freeway. 42 commuters were crushed. Buildings with a soft ground floor ended up in the street. The heaviest damage was centered in the Marina District. Made land filled in with debris from the 1906 disaster. The death toll citywide came to 67. Several problems seemed eerily similar to the 1906 quake. The first problem, communication. In a few minutes, the switchboard was jammed, and 911 calls couldn't get through.
The fire department's communications were so overwhelmed that for 30 minutes, they didn't know that the Marina District was on fire. A deputy fire chief watching television saw a picture of the marina on fire, and he noticed that there were no fire engines there. So he jumped in a car and he went to the Marina District. When he got there, he found out that all the underground water systems were ruptured, that the cisterns weren't available, so he called for the portable water supply system and the fireboat Phoenix.
The earthquake severed the water supply lines, and just like 1906, even the auxiliary hydrants were dry. The city was in danger of burning again. The deputy fire chief turned to a recently developed backup plan.
It was called a portable water supply system with portable hydrants that could be dispatched above ground. It would not be vulnerable to ground movement.
A fireboat was called to the scene to supply water. It needed to get in close to the shore.
There was an ebb tide on San Francisco Bay, and the fireboat Phoenix got to the marina 30 minutes before the tide would have been too low for the boat to make it in. But the pilot managed to maneuver the boat into the marina. But the fire was 6 blocks away. So a fire lieutenant ran into a bar where a bunch of young men had been watching the World Series and said, "We need help." And there were 200 young men, volunteers, waiting for the fireboat, and they dragged the fire department's heavy hoses 6 blocks.
It was so gratifying in 1989 to see the citizens rise up, holding hose lines, doing whatever they could to assist us, really wanting being part of the team to save our city, our beautiful city.
Over the next 12 hours, the fireboat Phoenix pumped 5.5 million gallons of salt water and put out the fire in the marina.
The city was saved. Barely. A taste of the destruction to come when the big one strikes.
There are a lot of people who believe because we survived the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake that we'll survive another one. The Loma Prieta earthquake was not even a wake-up call. It was more like a snooze alarm compared to the 1906 earthquake. And it had 1/32nd of the force of the San Andreas Fault, and yet it killed 67 people and caused billions of dollars of damage.
San Francisco is in a race against time. When the inevitable mega disaster topples buildings, ignites massive fires, and cripples bridges, those caught up in the calamity will endure much more than 50 seconds of intense shaking.
If there's a greater threat than the San Andreas Fault, it's complacency. It's the fact that we live in this beautiful place and we are so technologically advanced that we refuse to believe that something of this magnitude could happen again.